Welcome to this Policy Circle Move the Needle conversation. Today, we're diving into one of the most important forces shaping our lives and our democracy, and it's artificial intelligence. And with us are three leaders who bring very different perspective, but complementary on how AI is being developed, deployed, debated. First, I'm thrilled to introduce my friend Kristin Jackson, who is the co-founder and CEO of Freespoke, and it's a search engine that's built on privacy, transparency, balanced viewpoints. And before launching Freespoke, Kristen worked on Capitol Hill. She served as staff director for the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, and later held really senior roles in public affairs and policy. So she's really at this intersection of technology and policy. And today, really, she leads Freespoke with a mission to give people a trusted alternative to traditional search platforms and one that avoids bias and creates a really safer online environment. So we'll hear from her perspective. So thank you, Kristin. Thanks for being here. We also have Sergio Rodriguera, who is an entrepreneur with a expertise in AI, fintech, defense tech. He co-founded Straylight Systems, which is an AI company building multimodal agents to improve decision making, and serves as the chief growth officer at General Radar, developing advanced radar and AI systems to track airborne threats. And Sergio, you're a former naval officer, also served as Treasury Department, the Pentagon, and on Capitol Hill. And today you invest in early stage ventures in AI, cyber, fintech, and recently, congratulations, you were appointed to the SEC's Investor Advisory Committee. So welcome. So thrilled to have you, Sergio. Great. And finally, Brendan Steinhauser is the CEO of the Alliance for Secure AI, which is a nonprofit dedicated to ensuring that AI is developed safely, responsibly. And Brendan has spent 2 decades in strategic communications and public policy advising nonprofits, running campaign, co-founding his own public firms, public affair firms, and his organization is at the forefront of educating lawmakers and the public about the risk and also, of course, the opportunities of AI. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited to have this conversation because a couple of things. The Policy Circle is hosting a whole summit around AI. And also, this coming October 22nd, I invite everyone to register if you haven't done so. And also because I've been hosting roundtable conversations using the Policy Circle primer on AI. And I've noticed that people's understanding of AI can vary widely. And there's also a bit of an element of fear, which is understandable given what all of that we've learned with technologies, social media, the effect on brain development, etc. But before we begin, I'd love for each of you to define what is AI or what is artificial intelligence in your world and in your own words. So, Kristen, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, at the highest level, I would say AI is really technology trained and empowered with human like thinking. And a simple way to grab that is we had the Industrial Revolution that automated muscle, right? We went into this automation phase. And this AI revolution is really automating judgment, creativity, and reasoning. That's how I define it at a high level.
Use a strong word here on automating. So, we'll get more into this. Um, Sergio, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I really liked Kristen's answer. So building on top of that, I would say really where we sit is at the forefront of augmenting and automating workflow and various processes. So for us, for example, um, when we think of automation, there's a lot of data engineering work and infrastructure work at a very um, tactical level that enables AI. So if you think of artificial intelligence, right, you've got compute, you've got the algorithms, and you have data, and so all three have to work in unison for good outcomes. So where we sit is addressing those key challenges, and in today's world, as things are moving faster. We, and especially the work that we do for the military, has to enable that because for national security reasons, we have to make better decisions, but also the speed in which those decisions have to be made have to be done in real time. And so these processes that we can come in and start introducing automation to accelerate at least the workflows, the pipelines, will hopefully lead to better outcomes and better decisions.
Brendan, love to hear your thoughts.
I would say that artificial intelligence is an idea and a technology whose time has come. It's been something that has been discussed really seriously since the 1950s. It started as an idea at Dartmouth University, and of course, famously Alan Turing talking about the idea and being a pioneer in the field. It's been somewhat slow going since then, and so a lot of people have said, "Okay, this may never happen. We may never get there." But really, in the last 3 years, the last 2 years in particular, AI has really started on an exponential growth curve in terms of capabilities and in terms of all the ability to really hold the potential for some tremendous outcomes for humanity. If we can develop it safely and securely, AI is going to change the world. It's going to be probably the most talked about thing in the near future, and it will have a profound impact on everything from math and science to education and healthcare to national security. So there's a lot of exciting possibilities with AI. And I think our organization focuses on making sure that we realize those outcomes and we realize those possibilities for humanity and that we mitigate any risks.
Yeah. I think there's so much terminology around AI. And one of the things that the Policy Circle brief insight, we call it an insight because that environment is changing so much, is it helps define some key terms. And I thought it was really helpful to talk about to define the different types of AI that are there. And there's narrow AI, which is really built to do very specific tasks, which could be a chatbot on counseling, which could be a defense radar technology, right? There's predictive AI that analyzes patterns and forecasts outcomes. And then there's this generative AI, like these systems that analyze data, that understand the context and can create new content from text, images, videos, and it learns from massive amounts of data. And this really, these generative AIs become very powerful, creative companions and also raises a lot of questions around accuracy, ownership, liability, accountability, bias, etc. And then there's also what I've heard, what is called agentic AI and digital agents. And those are like systems that are acting autonomously and performing tasks with much less human input. And at the upcoming summit, we'll be exploring, what the future could be with all of these different types of AI. But I'd love to take a moment, and you guys all touched on it a little bit, but from your lens and your position in this world of technology, how do these distinctions resonate with you? And also, how do you understand them through your unique lens that you each bring to the conversation? And maybe we'll start with Sergio, just to mix things up a little bit. Sergio, why don't we start with you since you are in the defense world and this is such an important topic right now.
So we really tackle a lot of the regulated industries. So financial services, as you mentioned, the military and government, and also healthcare. And as Brendan mentioned, we're still, in the early innings. This is going to change how we do business, how we interact with one another, how policy is determined, all of these various things going forward. So our approach is very different. Part of the reason, given that because we built it ourselves, meaning we built the neural networks, we didn't necessarily build on top of other models. We didn't necessarily build on top of ChatGPT. One of the key reasons we did that was we wanted to move away from the probabilistic models that are the basis of generative AI. So as you as you can see with ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok, the user adoption is increasing. As a recent MIT report came out that said at the enterprise level, at the work level, still not quite, but there is this kind of shadow economy where a lot of folks are using it in their personal life and also using in the office, maybe under the radar of the chief information officer. But the point is, in all three areas that we go after, all three industries, your outcome, your result has to be much more accurate. And so, if we're working with the military for a national security, let's say, related mission, and the AI is not necessarily making the decision, not yet, but it is, building up and queuing up
Informing decision
exactly
making.
the outcome that deterministic model that has to be a lot more accurate, right? So you can't send in a warfighter to on a mission if the AI is building up those recommendations, having synchronized or synthesized, processed, and analyzed the data, and then essentially passing that off to a commander who has to make a decision. In those instances, right, the AI predictions or recommendations have to be more accurate. So that's really where we sit, and it's also very different than some of the other folks in the space.
Right. So it's a very narrow and predictive AI. So it's a very narrow space, and also you're using the technology to inform decision making, inform outcomes. Kristen, I love you're leading the development of a search engine that's grounded in facts. And how do you see AI bringing more transparency and truth to how people access information? On Freespoke, and I invite everyone to download the app and look at it, it's interesting how there is explore perspectives. And I love how you're using AI to capture different perspectives on the news cycle. So tell us more about how you're, viewing this world of AI.
Yeah, so AI does really accelerate that democratization of information that came about with the internet era. And it also, which is a great thing, and it also continues some of the problems that we've seen through these last 20 years with that Google era that took shape. And I really like how you provided those different elements of AI, Sylvie, because it's somewhat comforting to know at the very base level, AI has been a part of everything technologists have been doing for a long time now. So then you move into generative AI, and you can experience that in Freespoke today. You come in and you ask a question, what is AI? And it will generate an answer based on all of the content it has been trained on to date. But Freespoke is also stepping into that next layer that you spoke about of agentic AI. So how do you step into that? That's because coming out later this month, you'll be able to ask a follow-up question. And the ability to know exactly how FreeSpoke's AI is going to answer that follow-up question, we know how it was trained and we know what went into that training, but that AI is deciding what to say next based on all that training. So that's the agentic side of it and a way to look at it. The problems that, the positive is you have more access to information. The negative is what we've seen is as people have gotten more access to information over the years, they don't actually feel more informed and they're losing trust in the information that they're seeing. So that's where we've come in and we've said, let's create systems to empower people to navigate this information and make sense of it. So we brought up explore perspectives. That's through an unique proprietary index where we label content left, middle, right, and we make sure that content is feeding that AI model. Something that was interesting over the last 36 hours, Freespoke has indexed 3 times more left leaning content than right leaning content. And that's because that is what the internet consists of. It is heavily filled with content on the left. So a model has to come in and say, okay, we're going to take that and we're going to even it out to give people both sides. So they have the full story and they are informed from there. The last bit of just high level technical, we could always get into more detail or send it in the show notes. There's the training, and then there's the grounding, and then there's the evaluation. So the training went in at the base level. All these large language models you've experienced at OpenAI or Anthropic and Grok, all of that training on the World Wide Web comes out pretty similar. And then they each fine tune in their training to give their model a personality. So that's what we're seeing today. Grounding is where Freespoke special sauce comes in because we're enhancing what that model is grounded in when it gives you an answer, pulling in podcast insights and more content from different sides. And then there's an evaluation phase in the technical component where you're constantly evaluating it and training it in feedback loops to make sure it's performing and upholding the standards you put in place.
Yeah, interesting. That's a really great way of explaining how models are developed and how information is displayed. And I think the other piece that you have not mentioned is also that AI models take into account, generative AI in particular, or also all AI, take into account the previous interactions that you've had, the context, and what you've said before. So the answer to my question, will be different than the same questions that is asked in the AI models that you are using. So Brendan, I'd love to turn it to you with the Alliance for Secure AI. You focus on safe and responsible AI. There are a lot of risks with deep fakes, with information flooding the airwaves. There's disinformation. There's also like this idea that there's so much content can be generated by AI that human content may be tempered. There's a lot of risk, right? There's a lot of dangers, and I'd love for you to maybe highlight what are you working on? What do you feel are the key components that dangers or that people need to be aware of, and especially lawmakers need to be up to speed on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say first, I think that there are fewer dangers and fewer risks, I think, with some of these narrow AI that are focused on, for example, being really good at math or playing chess and being a grand champion or beating grand champions. I think what we think about is the agentic AI side. And, so on the positive side, you can think about where a year or two from now, you have agents that are booking you for a conference, they're writing your speech, they're booking your hotel, making a reservation at a restaurant, they're sending follow-up emails afterwards to attendees, doing all sorts of helpful, useful tasks. I think I would say though, so as we get that kind of power in this technology, I think the one big problem we haven't solved yet is the problem of alignment, ensuring that we kind of control that agentic AI and that it doesn't just sort of pursue these goals that it might develop over time, or it sort of misinterprets human goals, or a bad human actor might get behind the technology and sort of use it to do bad things. So I think that's a real concern. And I would say until we really solve that alignment problem, we have to be thoughtful about whether we want to go, too fast towards something like artificial general intelligence, AGI, which again, we may never get there. Some people think we may get there in 20 years. Some people may think we may get there in 2 years or less. But think of it in terms of just a much more capable, much faster version of an agentic AI that can pursue those goals. So that's sort of something to think about. But I think the here and now, like what has already happened so far, just in the last 6 months, even, there's been a ton of public reporting in major news outlets like the New York Times, the Atlantic, Fox News, Wall Street Journal, et cetera, well-documented cases of these existing chatbots, AI companions, and others like ChatGPT, you know, basically encouraging people to do things that would lead to self-harm. There's been documented cases of these chatbots and AI companions encouraging them to go down very dark paths towards psychosis and delusion. Some of those people had a predisposition to those sorts of problems. Others did not. And so I think we can just look at what's happened in the last 6 months or 9 months and say, okay, we have some well-documented cases on the mental health side, and especially as it relates to children. And so we can think about, as this becomes more powerful, faster, and sycophantic, which it already is, where it sort of tells you, what you want to hear. You can see where that could lead us to some major problems on the mental health side of things, and especially with children. And so kind of final point I'll make on this is that one thing that's troubling for us at the Alliance is looking at some of the policies that some of the frontier labs have. For example, Meta, which allowed their AI companions to essentially talk to 8 and 9-year-olds about things that were inappropriate and were sensual and romantic in nature. And those are words that Meta used. So I think there are some safeguards we need to talk about. But I would just say those are some of the harms that I think everybody can kind of relate to and see that have already happened. And so we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how to change those policies and get those companies to change those policies, and then look at what are some ways that we might have to look at, whether it's legislation or it's just using the private sector and scrutiny and accountability and transparency to just sort of encourage them to do the right thing. But those are some of the concerns that I think that most people can relate to, although there's a bunch of others, but maybe we can talk about that more later.
I think it's interesting also how the industry is looking to self-regulate. Already ChatGPT is coming out with a ChatGPT 14s where they can identify your age somehow the age of the user and then direct the user to the appropriate ChatGPT. So that's I think every company is really working hard to, as people are using it, to establish the right guardrails in these open platforms. I'd love to for us to explore a little bit of the ecosystem. So in the policy circle brief and insight, in the policy circle insight, we highlight the core contributors in shaping this age of intelligence. And there's, and I like to do that because we identify who are the stakeholders, and then I think it helps us follow the news, follow who are the actors, where can the influence needs to be, and we could start being at the table and shaping the future essentially. So I'll lay out what I have, and I'd love for each of you to react to this. We have like the core technology builders of this technology, and many of you has mentioned the core AI infrastructure, open AI. There's Anthropic, there's this basic infrastructure, there's labs that then other groups are using. There's the infrastructure, so there's a core technology builders, there's the infrastructure providers, from the cloud technology to the to the chips, the all of the different pieces, data centers that power this new technology. And then there's energy, there's utilities. This has been in the forefront, where there's massive new power demands from the data centers that power this technology, and this is putting pressure on the grids that supply everybody. So that's, a core player, stakeholder in this ecosystem. And as we've talked about, there are academic institutions where a lot of innovation is happening that are shaping ethics, research, policy, and there's think tanks such as the Alliance for Secure AI. And then there's entrepreneur like you, Kristin, Sergio, that are applying this technology to solve major problems in finance, logistics, defense, and optimizing and increasing what we do essentially. So when we look at this landscape and who is in this, who I'm wondering who you feel in this ecosystem is the most influential with the government right now, perhaps in shaping policies that will in turn foster innovation, development, the adoption of AI, etc. So I'd love to for you guys to react to that, and maybe Brendan, love to start with you in terms of your relationship as part of building the Alliance for Secure AI.
Yeah, I think currently, as in many issues, industry has a lot of influence. They obviously are building these products. They have an interest in doing that and in competing and innovating and trying to get products to market. I think if you see what they say publicly and privately, most of them also want America to lead. I think there is sort of a growing consensus, although some companies are sort of trying to sell their chips all over the world, including to China, which raises some national security concerns that I'd love, Sergio to talk about, given his background and interest. But I think, for the most part, industry has like the most influence. They're doing massive government contracts, whether it is in defense or, offering their services and their products to congressional offices, to the administration and that sort of thing. And that's pretty typical of a lot of different areas. I think the role of nonprofits and watchdogs and journalists and others and just citizen advocates is to raise questions and as good citizens and good watchdogs to say, okay, we understand industry needs to innovate, they need to make a profit, they need to, develop technology that is going to create untold amounts of wealth and hopefully prosperity and solve some really important problems and do some exciting things. But what are those safeguards that need to come into place, or what are they not spending enough time or money on? Again, going back to safety and security. So, for example, it's in the industry's interest to sort of go very, very fast. They're kind of driving down the road 80 miles an hour. They don't want a whole lot of brakes. They want just the minimal amount of brakes. And I understand that. But I think our role is to say, okay, we have to have brakes, and we have to kind of be thoughtful about when to tap those brakes. But here are some things that we would like you to do. Again, acting just in the private sector, laying out, here are the policies we want to see, here are the changes we want to see, here's the kind of information and physical security that we think the labs should have to protect their model weights, to protect the actual AI systems. And one of the big ones I think they could do a little bit better job of is investing time and money into the alignment problem, which we talked about, making sure they can control this future kind of agentic AI, so that it does what we want it to do. And frankly, that's in their own commercial interest, I think, to do that. But may take some convincing, but I think that's the case. And then also, they are looking at things, this sort of analysis of what goes on in this black box of this neural network. It's the idea of mechanistic interpretability, interpreting the machine, if you will, or interpreting what's going on in the neural networks, which nobody really fully understands. It's kind of interesting how these neural networks work differently than the brain, but sort of similarly in other ways. And again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but if you read what they say and you read Turing Award winners and related fields, they talk about how it's kind of interesting because no one knows exactly how they're coming to their outputs. So it's a fascinating science. But I think those are the types of things we want industry to be thinking about. I think our role is to raise those questions, to get policymakers to ask those questions so that America can lead and innovate and, again, create all sorts of positive outcomes for not only America, but for the world, reap the benefits of that as a country, and then make sure we're doing it safely and securely. I think that's where we're at, and I think that's the role that the ecosystem of organizations plays in this.
Yeah, and that's right. And I think also, there's a big role for on education, educating the public on digital literacy to be responsible users of AI and having the forums to raise the flags when we anticipate, when we think that something could go wrong. Kristen, I'd love your thoughts on, this ecosystem. You are one of the players, you are an entrepreneur, and I know that you value competition and level, having a field where innovation can thrive and competition can thrive. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this ecosystem of the industry that is burgeoning. And we don't even know, like, what are the future jobs, right? If you think back, beginning of the internet, like, there were no such thing as YouTubers or bloggers or, so it's exciting to think about the possibilities.
And also from that perspective of being in Congress, working for Congress previously, and how they look at it, how they're influenced, right? So there is a reason why these big players, OpenAI and Google, they have a lot of power in shaping direction because, they've proven that they're large, they're productive, they've solved major problems for people enough that they can attract a massive user base. And so when somebody, a senator or a congressman or somebody in the administration is saying, hey, we need a roundtable, we need somebody to come in and tell us how this works, or that's who they call, right? So these big players have a big voice and for good reason. But I think part of the challenge is there aren't many people in our government who are technologists who understand deeply what Brendan is talking to and understanding how to push back against these big players. So I think an interesting debate I had was with an engineer on my team is he was saying, man, OpenAI is trying every day to keep these self-harm messages from coming up. Like it's not that easy to find for most people. And my pushback against him, and Brendan referenced this, we can create self-driving cars. If we want to put time and energy and money into protecting humanity in this online world, we absolutely can. But that is not the focus of these big companies who are going fast. So this is where I would appeal to your audience, Sylvie, to the average person out there who's listening to this and saying, but what do I do? And what you do is you find the companies, the entrepreneurs who are solving that problem, who are spending the time and the money keeping kids safe, making sure you see both sides, making sure that 3 times more one-sided information doesn't blot out the other side and people aren't informed. Find those companies you believe in, make sure it's a good product and that's going somewhere, and then advocate in your community, your friends and family, and up the chain. And what that empowers is you're coming to your lawmakers with a solution. Hey, this is important to me, and this company is solving it, and I need you to put a spotlight on it and make it the standard.
Interesting. And we'll come back to this idea of the forums that citizens might have to influence public policy. But yeah, I mean, there is, I think, with this new technology and from what we've learned, there's a real onus on each of us to be responsible about and very informed about the evolution and how it will change our work environment, but at the same time, to be positive about, as Brendan said, the innovations and the tremendous development that is ahead of us, which is so exciting. Sergio, I'd love to turn it to you. And as I described, the ecosystem of all the players, you are an investor. You are part of a company also developing this technology, but you also work very closely with the government to develop defense technology, as the the Defense Department are buyers of some of the technology that you're developing. So I'd love to get your perspective on the overall ecosystem, because I'm sure you're impacted by all of it, and I'd love to hear which you think of the strongest voices, or maybe it's balanced.
Yeah, no, no, thank you, Sylvie. I just, yeah, it's a very exciting time because as entrepreneurs, as many on this call and the folks that we interact with, we're out there trying to build solutions, right? We like to tackle hard problems. It's why we do what we do and put in the long hours. Um, and for me, interacting with a lot of emerging technology companies, especially around defense tech. So what you're seeing a big push on in and around defense is in the autonomy side, and so pushing forth on automated or UAVs, drones, which have been flying for a number of years. I mean, when I was serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, we we relied heavily on them, but it is now pushing into the commercial space, and so you're seeing it in warehouses or in construction, and so it's broadening outside of just military use. But we are pushing things like unmanned surface vehicles and unmanned ground vehicles. I'm lucky to be an advisor to an amazing company called Scout AI, which is pushing forth doing autonomous driving and developing their own models to go do that. And again, for the warfighter, it has to be done in a both innovative but also safe way to ensure that those vehicles aren't running into dangerous places. And so as the industry push forth on a lot of these capabilities, I really want to hand the kudos to the White House that when they addressed their White House AI plan, they attached three key pillars, all of them touching ensuring that the U.S. maintains its dominance in this space. So to your point, there's an entire ecosystem, but really supply chain that we have to ensure that we foster and we promote the capabilities here, but also again with our allies. But that starts with you laid out the infrastructure, data centers, the power that they need, the grid, which needs to be modernized to maintain and then ensure that we have those things running. But it starts with, rare earth. And so, the Pentagon most recently in did a deal, invested in a great company called MP Materials. And so, ensuring that we have the rare earths both here, but at least if we don't, ensuring that we have access to those. In many ways, there is a little bit of a race. We are, in competition with places like China, which has a different approach when it comes to AI. So, one of the key differences. So a big eye-opening event was when DeepSeek came out, right? Which was probably about 6 months ago now. But that, their approach, which now they obviously learned and saw a lot of what OpenAI are doing and some of the other key leaders, Anthropic and others. But their approach in terms of open sourcing their models is slightly different approach than what we have here. So what they're doing over there is open sourcing those models and allowing for entrepreneurs or those companies to take those models and then build on top of, which we don't really do here. We are moving forward and advancing a number of capabilities, especially in AI, but we have a slightly different approach. But with chips, Kristin has probably a better perspective on chip exports than I do. But again, it goes back to the point that when it comes to the infrastructure here to enable not just that the OpenAIs and Anthropics and all of those companies have the ability to keep innovating, which we need the data centers, we need the power to, we need the energy to power this growth. Uh, so all of those things, I think, as Brendan was mentioning, working very closely with policymakers and government, so that we on the business side, on the entrepreneurial side, can keep pushing ahead.
Can actually create. Yeah, I appreciate how you brought up actually two big points. One is the supply chain, which I didn't mention there, but the rare earth that you touched on is a key component in making magnets, right? That are used in drones and EV technologies, etc. And right now we depend on importing those from China. So there's been huge investment from DARPA into the technology to mine and manufacture these magnets, mine the rare earth, and then manufacture the magnets locally and also have a stable pricing so that local companies can purchase these and that way we have an independent supply chain. So I appreciate that you bring up that supply chain component and the role that we play, well, that companies, that all of the members of this ecosystem play into making it a smooth supply chain so that we continue to advance. The other, I think, that you touched on is China's approach to developing this technology. I recently learned there's also a race to developing faster computing power that's called like quantum computing. So there's huge investment in China, but also here in my hometown of Chicago, there will be a quantum computing lab that the state of Illinois is heavily invested in that brings University of Chicago and various companies to develop this computing power that would be 10x, 100x the existing power, and it's critical for national security to be able to keep everything that we do secure. Otherwise, it could be everything we have could be deciphered. So, before we close off, Brendan, I'd love to. So thanks for bringing that up and complementing this view of the ecosystem with the supply chain and this global perspective. Actually, Brendan, around this topic, I'd love for you to perhaps expand on what Kristin had touched on with, the importance for a citizen to be at the table and that are shaping policy, citizens, professionals. And as I was mentioning, I was just in a conversation with a therapist who built a chatbot to help people in their relationship with food. And she was saying how difficult it is to get the therapist certification. And yet, there's all these chatbots out there that don't have any kind of labels of verification, etc. What are the forums where professional citizens can really influence policy making and their lawmakers the way that Kristen talked about it? And I think that's the mission, I guess, of what you're doing with the Alliance for Secure AI, right? So I'd love for you to tell us, what can people do? Where can people go?
Yeah, it is a big part of our mission. And I think first and foremost, people need to just be confident that they can learn about this and that they don't have to have a PhD in, AI or quantum computing or machine learning to feel confident talking about this. Just read everything you can, be discerning with the information you have, but listen to podcasts, read books, get up to speed on the basics. It doesn't take too much time to understand some of the general power of this technology, how it's different, how it's similar to the past, and you can start coming up with your own questions for yourself, for your friends and family, for policymakers. And I think that we all are going to be experiencing more and more of this technology in our daily lives, whether we know it or not. To Kristen's point earlier, AI is built into a lot of things we're already doing, and it will continue to be built in to pretty much everything we're doing in the future. So I think get educated, be confident in talking about it, just as a regular citizen, as a parent, as someone who cares about people. There are so many potential impacts here that you have the right to advocate. In some ways, you might have the duty to advocate on this because it's that important, that transformational. So your opinion matters, your opinion counts. So I'll kind of start there. Once you get educated and you feel confident that you can talk to policymakers, I would start by saying, talk to your state policymakers, because a lot of the movement that's happened so far in different states is coming from the states, coming from state capitals. So different states are doing different things. Some of those bills might be good ideas. Some of those bills might be bad ideas, but weigh in to make them better, or weigh in if you think something is a good idea or a bad idea. I'm a little partial to my home state of Texas, but for example, they passed a law that prevented the use of AI for things like creating a social credit system, to prevent the use of AI for government surveillance on Texas citizens. Um, Many states have passed legislation to try and protect children online. There's a big role for the federal government as well. And so there's a lot of talk about should this come from the states or from the federal government. But I think, the states have a duty to act. They have a responsibility to act to protect their citizens. So I would say get involved with your local state representative, your local state senator. They're much more accessible. They're learning like you are. You may find that you know more than they do on this topic. They're looking for some sources and information. And so one of the things we're trying to do is make the information available to them, but we need citizen advocates to get involved, give them a phone call, tell them about your concerns. Again, you don't have to be an expert in any of this, but get up to speed as best you can and engage in the political process, because this is happening very fast. It's happening right now, and it's going to impact all of us. And so all of us have the right and the duty, I think, to be involved in the conversation.
And I want to add, that this is why the Policy Circle is hosting its whole summit on AI, but also that we are publishing this series of insight, which I think could be a really great way to become educated at first level on the language and all of the variety of issues, from education to privacy to government transparency to just the basics of what is tech policy. And then I invite everyone to host a conversation with colleagues, with neighbors, using the briefs. And the Policy Circle has a great model to facilitate these conversations, but it's fascinating what people bring to the table, their own perception, understanding, and also, it gives you a training ground and a way to strengthen your voice, build confidence, so that when you do interact with lawmakers, you could share with them how this is an important topic and that they need to become up to speed. And I guess you could also send them to resources that you are finding to help them build their overall acumen. Brendan, before we kind of wrap up the conversation, since you're talking, where do you think are right now the biggest gap that you think we will be hearing more about in the news that we should be aware of? You touched on it a little bit on things like surveillance technology that should be banned in the state and eventually, hopefully, at the national level. But what are the big gaps in around this technology and around the country in policy?
I would say it's a big question that nobody has the answer for, and it's a question that is going to be really important, which is how fast will this develop? Because, Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, has talked about the idea of the San Francisco consensus, the idea that artificial general intelligence followed by artificial superintelligence will happen within 2 or 3 years. Now, I don't know if that's the timeline. It could be 10 years, it could be never. But the profound implications of that are such that we have to get moving right now. And a lot of people you talk to in the Bay Area who are working on these problems talk about the disconnect between what people in San Francisco and the Bay Area think is happening and is imminent versus what policymakers in state capitals in Washington, D.C. are aware of, what they're tracking, and how to deal with that. And so, again, we could have a whole discussion about what is superintelligence, what does that mean? But the implications are incredible. It could be, a lot of good with some bad, or it could be a lot of bad with some good. So we don't know. We don't know that it will happen. But I think that conversation of the exponential growth in this technology over the next potentially 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 or 10 years, is something that we need to have more conversations about. And I know people are starting to think about that more in DC, but there's a huge gap between the people that are developing the technology and policymakers. So I would say that's one thing to kind of keep an eye on and do your own research on. Some of it is somewhat hypothetical and academic, but I think, if we're on that path, which many of the people in the Bay Area believe we are on that path, then we need to start thinking about the implications today.
It's the idea of also of accountability. As you mentioned, it will be incredibly important, especially as AI is shaping decision making in critical life, critical field. So, Sergio, from your perspective as a technologist, how do you feel? how do you see AI impacting reshaping jobs? And maybe, talk about it just in defense, especially in defense, and then, people can extrapolate to other fields. But uh, people who are part of defense, what kind of skills should they develop are needed, and how should leaders be preparing teams for those technologies? Love for you to touch on that.
I think going forward in the future, I'm lucky because both at Straylight and General Radar, we're sitting at the cusp and really, addressing these legacy problems that we have. So, when it comes to just sensors and the capability, the AI, what we like to say is we're automating sense and understand. So we're tackling and building cutting edge sensors and radars to modernize things like the FAA, right? So as we all know, just these radars and these systems have been around for 40, 50, 60 years. And there's lots of reasons also why they have not been modernized, but we're coming in both companies' instances or case, we're coming in and bringing both innovative approaches, low cost, sourced here in America using, we don't outsource any of the work overseas. So we're able to bring these new capabilities and new ways of doing things to address legacy industries, both in the defense side and civil aviation. So, and then I touched on robotics earlier, and I just think that could spur an entire new industry. So I think, obviously they're already being used in warehouses, for logistics and supply chain, or at least, if you go into a modern automotive factory, it's a lot of robots. But I do think as we look to robots being used, let's say in and around the house or assisted living, right, where, I point to movies and I look at a movie, there's a lot of bad and negative instances where AI is scary, but the one movie that I think actually kind of looks closer to maybe what the future looks like is iRobot, where the robots are in the house and helping out.
I guess you're like positive. Right? You have a positive outlook. And I think for everybody, everyone is worried that it's going to replace their job. And I've even heard like some people say, well, I don't want to use it because I don't want it to replace me. Right. But what if I'm hearing you, you're saying actually it's going to make you better at your job, and tools that are being developed out there will limit the errors, will speed up the capabilities for analyzing, for finding results, finding solutions. And that's how we have to look at it.
Yeah, robots, there's lots of things that they can't do that obviously you still need humans to do.
Yeah, that's right. Kristen, close us off with, how can people use AI responsibly? I know myself, and I've said that before, the more I use AI, the more I feel I need to have the more knowledge I have about a topic, the better the outcome. And, I hear in a lot of conversations that, people will not need to know as much because we have access to these AI tools to provide the knowledge. But I'm kind of now leaning towards the opposite, that we need to really expand our knowledge of how the world works, where we come from, how things functions, so that we can interact effectively with these tools. And I'd love your thoughts, since you're right in it and you're providing information and content to people. But I think that, you know the ramifications for education is that we have to teach more content versus just exploratory skills, is kind of my gut feel. But love to hear your thoughts to close us off.
I would also agree with Sergio that the robots are coming. So, as you think about that, what do you want that training data for that robot in your house to look like? And that's where everybody listening has to realize the individual, the human, must maintain control. And you do need to know more. You need to understand the gaps that only you as a human can provide. So, something I think that is also positive is MIT and Stanford and others have recent reports that are saying there is bias in this large language model, and nobody's questioning that. It's factual, and that's helpful, right? Like when you can see a problem, you can fix it. I thought the Policy Circle Insight had a great TED talk on minorities and marginalized communities. There is bias in training data that does not have equal treatment. So, as a human, you can see that. And my appeal to humanity is do not hand over control. You are in control. make sure you get the full story. We've already handed over control to a large degree on social media. The algorithm pops up the biggest clickbait, we click it, and then we repeat it without having any context. Stop doing that. It's only going to get worse if you continue to do that. Maintain control. Don't stop thinking for yourself. And with that, I agree with Sergio. I think it's a positive future.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Brendan, Kristin, Sergio, for joining us today. And if it's sparked your interest, join us at the Policy Circle Summit. We'll explore AI's impact on education, on money, mobility, healthcare, democracy, and most importantly, how you can follow up from this teaser of conversation that we just had on how you could step into shaping these conversations. So I want to invite you all to register at thepolicycircle.org and visit us. Your support also really fuels our mission and to make informed, constructive civic participation not an exception but second nature. So thank you very much for all of you for coming, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.